Good morning. Welcome to the Hillsborough County Affordable Housing Advisory Board meeting on October 10th at 9 a.m. And we are in the county center, and I just want to call the meeting to order and ask for a roll call so that we can make sure that we know exactly who's here today. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Overman,
Here.
Rosenwasser,
Here.
Myers,
Here.
Mathis, Abel,
Here.
Powell,
Here.
Goods,
Here.
Jackson Sims, David Hollis, and Julius Ottawepo,
Here.
and Elizabeth Strom.
Here.
Perfect, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for doing that. With that, we'll begin the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Excellent. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. We don't have any guests today. The board has been on for a little bit, so I will just say thank you, everyone, for being here. We do set aside 15 minutes in the morning to address any public comments. Anyone that would like to provide us with either guidance or comments has 3 minutes set aside to speak. I don't see anyone in the audience. Do we have anyone online?
No, Commissioner.
Okay, so
Thank
with
you.
that, we'll move on to approval of the minutes. Do we have a quorum, ma'am?
We do.
Excellent. Yay. Thank you all very much for being here. And with that, I'll consider a motion to approve the minutes for September 12th. Thank you. We have a motion by Councilman Goods, a second by Commissioner Myers.
I have a question. On page 50, line 2, it appears that the chair is recognizing never mind, my mistake. Wrong place, but that's okay.
Is it somewhere else?
No, yeah, I'll get to it, but don't worry about it. Keep going.
Okay. Well, give us your thought about what you thought you saw,
I thought,
in case someone else can find it in the minutes.
I thought you were recognizing Councilman Gudis, and then on the next page it says, Ms. Howell. You wrote yes, it was written yes, sir, and then Ms. Howell, but you were, yeah, there is a mistake. On page 51, Ms. Howell is being recognized, and then the chairman is saying on page line 1, yes, sir. That should be yes, ma'am.
Very good catch.
I knew it was there somewhere.
Okay. So with the appropriate amendments, we have a motion by Councilman Goods with the amendment on
Accept the
page
amendment.
50.
Accept the amendment for corrections.
Okay. And a second by Commissioner Myers. Seeing no other changes.
But I'm sorry, may I?
Yes, please.
I think the error is that instead of saying Ms. Howell there, it should have said Councilman Goods, because I think that's what he said. Is that right? On page 50, where it says Ms. Howell, line 2?
I believe that is true. So it may be,
So it's correct to say yes, sir. It just should say.
Right.
because I was actually recognizing
Yes.
Councilman Goods.
Right.
That was,
And so the
That's the-
comment
Thank you.
that is made below that is from Councilman Goods.
Right.
right, so
So
line
that-
1 is correct, line
Two,
2
it
should
needs-
say Mr. Goods,
I'm glad-
Chairman,
Right? That you're saying
Councilman
that.
Goods.
And where you acknowledge what Ms. Howell said. That's probably why it was confusing. So for the record, can you work with our transcriptionist and make that
Thank you.
correction for us?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we have a motion with amendment to the minutes for September 12th, and a second by Commissioner Myers. With that, please take a roll call vote.
Overman,
Yes.
Rosenwasser,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Mathis. Abel,
Yes.
Powell,
Yes.
Goods,
Yes.
Karen Jackson Sims, David Hollis,
Yes. Yes.
and Julius Adewepo.
Yes.
Motion carried, 10-0.
Excellent, thank you very much. That takes us to the chair's report. Currently, I don't really have a significant amount on the legislative issues, but I did want to bring to the board's attention that the work we're doing to increase housing units is absolutely imperative, and now even more so than it was. Obviously, all of us are very aware of what we've just experienced with Hurricane Ian. That has eliminated or destroyed a significant amount of housing, not so much in Hillsborough County, but in our surrounding counties, which is where a lot of the folks who can't afford to live in Hillsborough County have been going, especially in the very low-cost model of housing in terms of mobile homes and those types of situations. So being able to continue expediting the development of affordable housing in our county is even more important than it was prior to Hurricane Ian. Secondarily, I recently received a phone call and some information that was requested by a reporter with Creative Loafing that the number of evictions that we've experienced in June, July, and August have spiked to the highest level we've ever seen in Hillsborough County. During that 3-month period, we saw 3,000 evictions filed, and during the month of by mid-month in September, we saw 600 writs of writs of eviction. So basically, we're in a situation where people are being evicted at a very high rate. I'm doing some research, and I called our counsel for the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, Ms. Nancy Takamori, to really kind of take a look at our Tenant Bill of Rights again, make sure we're very clear. And so my goal over the next several months will be to reach out and educate our landlords on the Tenant Bill of Rights, make sure everyone's very clear about the wording and the language within that, and when it comes to the source of income and what is the best method of dealing with this. The city of Tampa rolled out a program for not only helping people with stabilizing their current income, current rental place, but also has a program that provides for move-in for individuals where if they have an application pending. But if you call a landlord and they say, well, we don't participate in that program, we don't participate in that housing program, that's the answers many of our residents are getting. So it's very clear we need to do some outreach and education in order to help not only landlords stay within the law, but also help tenants find a place to live. So with that, Mr. Rosenwasser.
If I may, Commissioner, you're absolutely right. And a lot of that is coming from owners to property managers, and where the owners are not located in the state or the city, and they are not aware of the source of income and other ordinances that both of those governments have passed. Unfortunately, they are pushing their property managers to continue to say that. And I can tell you that I and the association that I'm a past president of, the Bay Area Apartment Association, have been pushing property managers, and we represent probably 75 to 80% of the apartment communities. And NARPM has been doing the same relative to single family, saying it doesn't matter what your owner wants. This is a matter of what the law is, and you have to do it. And I know I just sent out to all 40 of my communities a memo, which I required leasing agents and managers to sign, acknowledging the fact that they don't answer the phone that way, that they don't interview people in that manner, and that all sources, as long as they're guaranteed in accordance with the ordinance, are acceptable, and even possibly extending those, because it may not be a 12-month requirement. If it's a 9-month or a 10-month, we can figure out a way to work for those additional 2 or 3 months. But I think my industry is doing the best it can do, but I just wanted to point out that most of the blame goes to the out-of-state multifamily owners and single-family owners, people who have bought a house down here and rented it out, or own a house down here and have moved out of town and are renting it. So we're doing our best, but yes, it is still happening. I do some testing on my own, and find that quite often that's the first answer we get on the phone is, no, we don't participate in Section 8. Yes, you do, you have to. So.
And I think in order to help those smaller complexes possibly, or out-of-town complexes that are managed by property management companies that are out of town, is to develop an educational program, to make sure it's very, very clear. Because I was doing basically secret shopping, it's like call up, hey, do you have any availability? And the city's program, you have to have an application pending. So if a person pays the application fee, only to find out, because they didn't ask the right question prior to filling out the application, and find out that they have a policy where they don't participate in the program. They didn't say they didn't accept Section 8. What they said is they don't participate in the program. And so we need to figure out how to help, I think, landlords understand what participate in the program means, and when you choose not to, or not to do that, what that means legally, and to make sure our code enforcement follows up on those circumstances in the event that the compliance is not available. Councilman Goods.
We're going to have a tremendous problem when November hits. A lot of leases will be up. I know people have called me already. I made that statement on the news last week. The hurricane didn't help us, because even when you want to try to do rehab and some other things, materials will now go up now because of the need of materials, number one. So it's going to hurt our county in general, because even with our tree program, I found out a lot of those tree guys have now told us, our East Tampa manager, that we've got to go down south. Mm-hmm. So now that hurts the program here, because they're going down south to make more money, to get that done. You talk about rehab, so now you don't have the contractors that will stay here, they're going to go down there. When you talk about the programs, you talk about enforcement. We have no enforcement, number one. Number two, there's no registry. There's nothing for right now for us to go and actually all the apartment complexes that are here to know who they are, make sure they're registered. Same thing with say property owners. I think that we're doing some work, but I think we've got to fine-tune a few things so people can know what the law is, or understand that this is what you should be doing. And right now it's all about greed. I'm sorry to say that. People say, well, let the market sell itself, but you can say let the market sell itself, but at the end of the day, is the market putting more money in people's pocket to pay? So people say, well, the rent will never come down. You're right, the rent is not going to come down. So you tell me, how still can those people be able to pay rent? The rent never comes down. So like I said, when the rent stabilization failed, if you're saying they're going to continue to do this and their pocket is not getting full, you could continue to have the same. But okay, how much we talking about? We got to build more units. I don't care how much more you build. We can build as much more we can build, but if you can't afford to get in there, it makes no difference. Mm-hmm. And we have to understand that, and developers understand. And I think there's some things that I did talk to some developers that could be done with the bonus density. I believe it'll be able to help us a little bit. I'm going to be talking about that with some folks next week and bringing that to council. But I think you have to look at other alternatives, because if their pockets are not getting full, they can't pay. My daughter's rent just went up $450, so I have to help her now, because her pay is not going to increase. She has 3 children. She grown, okay, come stay with me right now. So I look at the things that we have to try to do, and it's gonna be a struggle, but I still say we have to look at the market and we use the word cap, but you have to look at if property taxes only going up 3% a year, we have to look at how we're going to allow folks to be going almost 40% in rent. So I'm very curious to see what the Orlando, on November 8th, how that turns out. I think it's going to be a tall tale for a lot of counties and cities once we see what Orlando does, and I'm be watching it very closely.
I will be too. The issue on the eviction is something I have reached out and spoken with the Attorney General regarding maybe a temporary statewide moratorium, because we're not the only county that's facing this. Some of them that now have lost a significant number of units are now at risk right at the end of the month when they were getting ready for a hurricane, not at risk of not having their rent paid. I've not gotten an answer. I mentioned it at our Board of County Commission meeting last week. I'm hoping we can get some resolution, and I've reached out to our state and Congress to at least explore that option. Obviously, it needs to be done quickly if possible. The likelihood of it happening is probably slim, but I figured let's ask.
Chair, thanks a lot for giving me the floor. Can I take a few minutes to help a collective understanding of what exactly we're looking at? I personally feel that we're tethering at the edge of
Please stand by. We seem to be having a technical issue.
Yeah, I just saw that go down, so 1 second.
Okay, sure.
Keep your thought.
Absolutely, trying to keep it in mind here. So I feel that what we're looking at is a breakdown or let's say falling apart of the partnership that needs to be in place to solve this problem. First, we had COVID coming, and then we had a bubble in the housing market, and there's a new basis that has been set as people buy houses, and for them to justify their investment, they think they have to increase the rent to justify the investment because a new basis has been set. That's number one. Number two is that the government comes in. I just received proposed tax bills on my personal property, and the government comes in and say your house is now, I don't know, whatever the market says and whatever the criteria was used, but then the taxes have increased 20, 30%. And I'm assuming the same proposed tax bill is being applied to all the commercial investment properties as well. Any reasonable landlord, as an investor, that always is constantly seeking to make sure that they at least even out or even make profit. We want to pass on those costs to their tenants. Another dimension. So as Hurricane Ian happened, I heard that it's one of the most expensive hurricanes in the past, I think, 70, maybe 90 years, estimated to cost insurance companies about $47 billion. Insurance companies are not for-profit businesses. They are going to make profit, and they're going to pass that cost down to every residential property that exists in the state of Florida. They already exited. I received a note from my insurance company. Maybe I should have mentioned their name, but they're not going to cover my property anymore. So I have to look for another insurance. And guess what? I have to go back to the market and pay this higher premium to have my property covered. Again, I don't think this problem is unidimensional. I think there's multiple dimensions, and they, exist in this whole crisis. And then the question is, what can we do as a board to start to mitigate this upcoming tsunami of this problem? I think number one, there's got to be an engagement of a government, whoever determines, property taxes, to really, have some serious, meaningful conversation about how to either, I guess, segment our properties, are defined, and how those proposed tax bills are being applied to those properties, because eventually the tenants are going to pay this cost, either we like it or not. Second thing is that I think that we need to also have some sort of conversation, maybe rein in the madness in the insurance space. I'm not sure how much leverage the government or the board even has about this, but I think there's got to be some meaningful conversation. And I think the third, again, along the lines of what you had proposed, Chair Overman, I think there has to be some significant, simple but significant communication that cuts across board, from tenants to landlords. For example, a simple blurb or manual that says 10 things that you are required or you should be in the know about as a landlord in Florida, and circulate that to all commercial residential properties that have been rented out, the landlords. Maybe on the other side, I feel like tenants to have responsibility. For example, if a tenant maintains a house in good order and there's no increased cost for turning over the unit, then the landlord will not pass on the cost to the next tenant that needs to occupy the unit. Maybe some communication along those lines can help to, over time, maybe mitigate this potential escalation of a crisis that we're staring at. But I really think that we're tethering at the edge of a heightened problem on our hands. Thanks.
Without a doubt, and I don't disagree with you at all. Ms. Jackson-Sims, did you have your hand up?
I didn't have my hand up, but I did have something to say.
Okay, please.
I think that we've also lost sight of the fact that as we receive federal dollars for COVID, how many people were getting their rents paid for them. And they were receiving 5 and 6 months worth of rental subsidy and utility subsidy because they were already income challenged. So those funds went away September 30th. And now they're in the position where they're in units that they couldn't afford last month, and now they're faced with, what am I going to do? So while we've already seen a hiccup on evictions, we haven't seen the height of evictions in this community yet, because this is just October, the first month after rental subsidies ended. So we're going to continue to see that spike, and landlords are going to continue to want to go through the process of evictions, and the problem is there's no supply that these families can afford to be able to move to. And even if there was, once they have that eviction on their record, a lot of folks are not going to rent to them. So it's bad now, but we need to understand it's about to get a whole lot worse.
Well, and with that, I would like to ask Ms. Takamori to summarize the most recent change that we made to the Tenant Bill of Rights regarding notice and notice of non-renewal. Because if anybody's listening that's a landlord, and that September 30 date occurred, last week, a week and a half ago, that has been adopted and ratified by the Board of County Commission and has adjusted our ordinance. And I think it would be wise to make sure that we make mention of the changes that we did to try and address that wall, and to make sure that residents had at least some time to be best prepared, depending on the circumstance. Ms. Takamori?
Yes. So the amendment that we made a couple months ago to the Tenants' Bill of Rights provides that if a landlord, a residential landlord, proposes to increase the rental rate of a dwelling unit by more than 5% at the end of a lease for a specific term, they need to provide at least 60 days prior written notice to the tenant, and the notice has to include all the fees and the costs to be paid by tenant during the new rental term. And it also, the Tenant Bill of Rights was also amended to require additional notice for termination of rental leases that don't have a specific duration. So where there isn't a lease that already speaks to this issue. So if the rent is payable on a monthly basis, instead of the minimum of 15 days notice, which the statute provides, 30 days written notice is required. So, And then if there's a residential tenancy that has rent paid on a longer duration than 30 days, 60 days written notice is required prior to termination of lease.
And what date did we adopt that ordinance?
The effective date with penalties is October 1st for the ordinance, so it was actually adopted on August 4th, but and took effect August 8th, but there was a grace period so we could provide some education campaign.
And so during that time period, we saw 1,300 evictions filed. I would suggest that maybe our apartment complex and property managers were paying attention to this. So I'm not sure that people not knowing what's in the Tenant Bill of Rights is an issue. Mr. Rosenwasser.
Couple of different points. Regarding the evictions, what we're trying to do in the apartment industry is have management companies look at the reason for the evictions. If somebody was renting an apartment for $2,000 a month, and they could not afford that apartment, and because of that, they were evicted. But they're now applying for an apartment that may be $1,500 a month, and it's more within their reach. We're asking the property managers and the owners to, like they do with medical bills, disregard that eviction if there is an effort by the resident to get their housing within their budget. As far as Councilman Gooden's comments, there is a registry. DBPR, every apartment community has to be licensed if it's 4 or more units with DBPR. And within that application, it asks for the county and the municipality. And so maybe what we need to do is provide copies of those those listings by county and city to code enforcement, so that they, as they're driving around, they can see who is and is not registered, and then appropriately go after penalties. The problem with the 3% cap is that it goes away with the sale of an apartment community. And it doesn't carry forward. And so a new owner is now facing significantly, and I can't tell you how many New York and New Jersey owners I've gotten calls from that have said, hey, my current management company can't do anything, but our pro forma did not include a 25% rent increase in real estate taxes, and because it's a new sale that's been reported, it's gone up significantly. And so that's part of the problem. You're absolutely correct. There are, as of last count, between 6 and 8 insurance companies that have written policies in the past in Florida that no longer do so. They are canceling them, they can't, but they're not renewing them. And that is putting a huge strain on the state's insurance fallback. And so it is putting a lot more pressure on it between the taxes and the insurance. The good news, and I will share this with the chair for her to share with others as she wishes, Yardi Matrix, which is a national company, does a monthly report on many major, I think it's over 40 major markets, Tampa, of course, being one of them. And what they're reporting is that since, in the last 30 days, rents have, for across the board, whether it be lifestyle, whether it be single family, whether it be multifamily, have flattened or gone down. So any of the increases we are seeing are those folks who didn't take it, who didn't do it before, and they're now doing it. They're doing it at this point. But it has dropped, and they actually made a comment in their commentary section that says, after a year and a half of record-setting growth, multifamily rents have hit the brakes. Asking rents have flattened this summer at $1,718, which is a lot of money, for 3 months in a row. That comes after rents rose more than 20% since January 2021. So there is a flattening. It's going to take time. I'm not sure it's going to be a permanent flattening because of the hurricane and the other issues, but it is a sign of hopefully some affordability coming back.
Excellent. Come on, Councilman Goods, and then,
You know, I'm not a big stat person because you can manipulate stats all day long. And I appreciate that, reading that, but again, you say flatten. But if it's flattened out at $1,800, how does one still get into an apartment? It still doesn't balance out. The money's still not going into the pocket to be able to pay for rent. Two, in reference to your question about insurance, and I think we're gonna need to probably do a possible study within this county, because I can tell you, I would say roughly maybe 60 to 70% of people don't have insurance, maybe higher.
that's a possibility.
Not
Councilwoman Abel.
Based on what Ms. Jackson Sims said, it seems like this is just the tip of the iceberg with a lot of people who are getting assistance. They're no longer getting that assistance, and then the evictions will come. But I recently learned about the very rapid turnover time we have in Florida when it comes to evictions. Like, you miss your rent payment, you'll probably be out by the end of the month. And to add to what you were saying, it's not only about to happen a lot more in greater quantity, but it's also going to happen fast. So there's going to be a lot of people who don't have homes. So it's just going to escalate exponentially, I think. And I think we need to brace ourselves for that and make sure also that there's an education piece in place for tenants about that fast turnover time. Like, if they miss that payment, they don't have any wiggle room. They have like 5 days, or they're not even going to get a court date. So.
Right, and that, the registry has to be paid in full in order for them to even participate in the legal process. We are in a pay-to-play state. We have an outstanding case that's challenging that. However, I've not heard whether there's a ruling as of yet. But it does make for a very difficult circumstance, and that's part of the reason why some of the things we are going to do that Ms. Howell's going to bring us up to speed are going to be so critically important to get some of these units that we've not only been working on, but get other units on board, and then other ways that we're trying to stabilize existing units to make sure that we don't lose them has been a strategy that we've been putting into place. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody's very aware. Those folks that were living on the edge and spent monies to get ready for a hurricane on the 5th probably got a notice when they weren't able to pay their rent in full in October. So you are right. We are on the tip of an iceberg that's not going to be fun to be on. So working with our partners and working with our landlords, I'm meeting with the Bay Area Apartment Administration Association on Friday in order to be able to address some of these issues and to work on developing partnerships with those that are landlords, so that we can really look down that tunnel and figure out what it's going to look like for many of the residents within Hillsborough County. So with that, we will go on to the director's report, unless there's other comments that need to be made. Ms. Jackson Sims, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, because we opened this can of worms in conversation, I don't think we should just talk about what's about to happen or what is happening. I think as an advisory board that we need to be proactive and say, okay, we have one piece of legislation that came up to address a portion of it. The insurance industry problems are another issue that's going on, impacting us, and that's primarily from the state end, so perhaps we need to be asking for another special session at the state to address the insurance problems in the state of Florida. And speaking to our legislative delegation right now, knowing that we need a more aggressive information system going out, maybe we need to turn around and ask Ms. Howe if she can coordinate with the county's department to up a different kind or new information program so that we're not just talking to the apartment association, but we're talking to the end users so that they know that there's some kind of help out there, that there's some kind of system in place, or if they're having these problems or knowing that they're going to have them, for them to get ahead of it. So I don't think we should just be talking about we got this problem. I think we've got to say, how are we going to address this problem? And what recommendations do we make to the Board of County Commissioners for them to get ahead of the problem? And I know we got two of you here in the room and that we have the other jurisdictions covered, but what kind of recommendations does this body make to our political entity so that they can get ahead of the problem? Because I think they're counting on us to give them the advice that they need to address housing in our community.
I don't disagree.
Commissioner Overman.
Yes, ma'am. This is
Ms.
Cheryl Howell.
If I could just share one thing for a minute, because I think before you get into recommendations, it's really important that you understand what we're currently doing as well. And so we do have the Tenant Bill of Rights, and the Tenant Bill of Rights is kind of bifurcated in two ways. So we have the tenant piece of it, and then we have the landlord piece of it, and both of those pieces has an educational component to it. Educating the landlord on what their rights are, but also educating the tenants on their rights. So within the Affordable Housing Services Office, we have created a navigator program. And so, Ms. Jackson-Sims, with this navigator program, we have about, I want to say it's about 10, we're contracting with about 10 individuals, and they go out into specific areas of the county. And they knock on doors in their catalog, and they're reaching out, and they're sharing all of the information that we have in terms of Tenant Bill of Rights, in terms of any kind of resources that's out there, whether it be home ownership resources or housing rehab or rental assistance or mortgage assistance or, homeless services, whatever type of resources we have, childcare, indigent health care, we share all of the resources from the county, or most of them that we can share with the community. And we started that program, I want to say that was in May or June of this year. And so we have continued that program, and we will continue that program, and we are going in some of our most impoverished areas to share that information with the family and the residents that live there.
Thank you, Ms. Howell, for that report. I appreciate that. I'm not letting your issue go. Okay, so Mr. Adewepo.
Yes, Madam Chair. I just want to say that I like the suggestion that was made by Ms. Karen Sims, and I like the point, this update about the Navigator program. I just have to also point us maybe to a more efficient direction on this note. We can use old methods to solve these new generation problems. I feel that maybe I should ask this question if I can. Does the affordable housing have a database of landlords within Hillsborough County? Like database showing their phone number and their email? Because I feel like the communication needs to go out faster. It needs to reach them quicker. It needs to get to them and even get them to acknowledge, that they've seen this, they've processed it, and they're going to incorporate that into their workflow, operational workflow. The same thing applies to tenant, but maybe tenants to a lesser degree. So I'm just making a recommendation. If this Navigator program can be bolstered, with this digital hedge and tools that we have, so that truly we can engage the critical mass and not just knock on doors. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good question. And to some extent, yes, we do. We have that information not only from the DBPR, but our home stabilization team knows pretty much who the landlords are where people have requested assistance and rental assistance. So we have somewhat of a database that I'm aware of who to contact when someone has applied for benefits and we know who they are. But whether that is a complete list, I don't have the ability to verify that information, but I think it would be wise to have one and to figure out a way to target those that are providing rental space for residents with some good direct information, even if it's direct emails or something like that. But I don't know that we have that tool in place. So if there is a recommendation that can be made or a motion can be made to take some action, I'm all ears.
Just following the regular protocol, I'd like to move a motion proposing that the Housing Board initiates a process to get a database of existing landlords in the county and proceed to engage them with an attestation, understanding the requirement of a county, and maybe even reflecting that in their, tenant onboarding workflow or management workflow. Thanks.
A management workflow in terms of adhering to the Tenant Bill of Rights?
Correct.
Okay, all right, that's more clear. So we have a motion. Do we have a second? Second for discussion?
Yes.
Okay, yes, ma'am, you're recognized.
And that would relate to 4 or more units or all units?
Maker of the motion?
I'd like to recommend for all units because all tenants are impacted by, this relationship.
So in this case, in your reference to 4 or more units, those 4 or more units are required by the state to register with the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. They have the data on those who carries the license for those properties, but they may not have the data on who manages those properties. So it will take some time to put that data together, but I don't think it's impossible to get. But when it comes to the folks that own residential units that are for rent or duplexes, and those that don't fall under the licensing requirement by DBPR, that will take some time to gather that information. But those individuals, they don't pay sales tax on residential, so there's not no way to sort of track whether or not rental income is actually coming in. It's just whether or not there's homestead filed on a residential property that gives us a clue about whether that's put together. And that's part of the reason why we don't have a registry. It is not a small task to put that information together. Commissioner Myers.
I think it would probably be appropriate to have Consumer Services come and speak to the AHAB board on the actions that they've already taken and the targeted housing strategies that they've used to communicate with the property owners. So right now, Consumer Services does the enforcement, and so they do the education piece of it. And so I think it would be important for them to share with this board what they've already done so that we could prevent any kind of duplication of services within the within this effort to kind of move things along. And so, as I said previously, I think it's important for the AHAB board to know what's already being taken on. And so Affordable Housing Services does not do the enforcement piece. I think it's important to say that. Consumer Services does. And I believe that them sharing with this board some of that educational outreach and efforts would be appropriate before we took a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners.
Thank you, Ms. Howell. Commissioner Myers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I was going to refer my comments to Ms. Howell, but she's made a statement. So I would suggest that we hold off on the recommendation until we can hear from Consumer Affairs to address the issue we're talking about, the database.
Okay. I'm sorry. I recognize you.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you. Ms. Howell, I have a question for you. The Navigator program, is it possible for me to get a copy of that schedule? Because as they go out into the community, want to make sure that Plant City is included when folks go out in that program, if it's possible, please?
Absolutely, and I can tell you that Plant City is included, and I believe that they've already gone out to Plant City at least one time. So typically, they spend about 2 weeks out in a particular area, and so and I'll see when they're scheduled to go out in that area again. But absolutely, ma'am.
Okay, so we do have a motion on the floor, and I would like to move, Ms. Mathis, thank you for that question, because I do know that, you know, each of our partners have participated in this process of addressing the rights of tenants and landlords. Currently, the city of Tampa has adopted the Tenant Bill of Rights. However, Temple Terrace and Plant City haven't. So while we may adopt programs to assist in educating folks about the Tenant Bill of Rights, it doesn't apply in Plant City because Plant City hasn't chosen to address it and adopt the similar language on behalf of their landlords and their tenants. So, nor has Temple Terrace. So if we're moving forward on adopting a strong strategy of helping not only our tenants but our landlords understand the Tenant Bill of Rights, you know, where it applies is also important. That was part of the reason why I worked so hard with the city of Tampa, because it's such a large, you know, such a large part of Hillsborough County, that in order to keep that consistency and where the density of rental properties were, it was critical that we partner with the city of Tampa to get that adopted. And it's my understanding that it's relatively the same. Whether or not they've adopted the extension of the notice, as we did back in August, is still in question. Do you know whether or not the city council has addressed that, Councilman Goods?
I think legal and the housing department is looking at that. But I don't think it hasn't come back yet.
Okay. So we do have some inconsistencies that we would need to address in your effort to address your motion, Mr. Ado. I'm going to mess it up. I'm so unfortunately tired right now that I can't even say my own name. But Mr. Adewapo, I got it right. And so I think I would suggest considering amending your motion to have the staff come back with a recommendation on how to improve the goals that you're trying to accomplish. And that way we can hear from Consumer Services, we can hear from code enforcement, we can hear from those that manage our rent distribution and home stabilization program, our partnership with THHI, because they are helping those families that become homeless as a consequence of this eviction issue. And then maybe we can get a response from our legislative partners in this process to see if there's going to be any motion or any action or even consideration of legislation that could protect either tenants and notice for landlords when it comes to possibly a temporary moratorium on evictions, given where we are. Mr. Rosenwasser.
Thank you, Commissioner. Two things. Number one, in the Tenant Bill of Rights, I know it talks about communication, but I can't stress that enough, that if somebody is not able to pay their rent, they should be able to talk to their landlord, call, write, do whatever is necessary, because that will be critical if they're able to put the money in the registry, of course, and go before court. If they don't communicate, then the process will go very, very quickly, as Ms. Abel said. And there are some landlords out there, I would hope more than we expect, that do communicate well with their residents, because the cost of turning an apartment and making it ready for the next resident is equal to probably 1.5 to 2 months' rent. And if you can salvage that, you can keep them. As far as the chair's comments relative to DBPR, there are 3 sections in the DBPR application. One is for the owner information, one is for the location, but the third is if there's a property manager, who is that person, they're required to have a local contact. And so that information is available. Thank you.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So to address Ms. Jackson Sims' comments and to give this board an opportunity to be advisory in nature and give some guidance on where we'd like to go, based on what you've heard, would you like to add or change your motion at all, or should we vote on that motion and then make a new motion?
I'd like to amend the motion as proposed to essentially have the affordable housing staff come up with recommendations in terms of gathering the information that we need to know what's being done and what still needs to be done.
Okay. Are you willing to address his amendment or just, Ms. Sims, you offered the second, that's why.
Correct, and I'm fine with the amendment, including that we have all the departments explain to us their various roles.
Excellent. And so that next meeting, and you want that back by November 14th? That's our next meeting,
Yes, please.
Okay.
November 14th.
in order to indicate some urgency at this. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor and we have a second. Please do a roll call vote.
Overman,
Yes.
Rosenwasser,
I'm
Yes.
sorry. Do you have a question, Mr. Powell?
We're voting on what exactly, like, I didn't understand the whole crux of the motion. Like, we're delaying your desire for the affordable housing, or you completely amended it to have the Affordable Housing Board come back with a recommendation, not with your original motion?
Why don't we allow him to restate the motion for clarity's sake, for not only for our minute taker, but also for our board? Okay, go right ahead.
So restating the motion to have affordable housing office or staff circle back to the board by November 14th with a representation of the different departments that are involved in the Bill of Rights, stating what actions are being taken, especially relative to communicating the Bill of Rights to the landlords and the tenant, and essentially what other steps have been taken to have those records, the records of all the landlords, and making sure that they also attest to the understanding of this Bill of Rights for the landlord and the tenant.
Okay, all right.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Powell? Okay, great. May we start with the roll call once again?
sure. Overman,
Yes.
Rosenwasser,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Mathis,
Yes.
Abel,
Yes.
Powell,
Yes.
Goods,
Yes.
Jackson Sims, Hollis,
Yes.
and Adewepo.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Excellent, thank you very much. Are there any other comments before we move on to the director's report? Ms. Sims, do you have Jackson Sims? Okay. And I do agree, there's an opportunity here to bring some information together to find our best way of adopting good practices within Hillsborough County, especially given the crisis, and there's some opportunity. I do also recognize that it is really challenging looking at this situation. For example, we still do not have a REACT report, or I have not been given the REACT report, which is the report of safe housing that HUD does for Silver Oaks. No, well, that isn't the reason. And it didn't fully sell. It did replace the poor property manager, But, we were due that report on August 15th. They were asked for an extension to September 15th, and we still have not gotten that report. So holding property managers accountable and even HUD accountable is a little challenging. So it's not a small task, and we're going to work on trying to get you at least a good understanding of what we can do locally to make a difference for our residents. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Ms. Howell.
Good morning. Good morning. Ms. Howell, I am the Assistant County Administrator for Equity and Community Impact. And so I'd like to cover a few things this morning, and thank you for the really robust conversation and the advocacy in regards to our tenants that are in very vulnerable situations right now. The first thing that I wanted to cover is we now have an interim affordable housing services director, and she's on the line this morning, Ms. Brenda Brackens. She's here this morning, and I wanted to take just a moment to introduce Ms. Brackens to you. I've personally worked with Ms. Brackens for about 13 years now. She has an extensive experience in grant management, and so she currently works within the department, and she's taken on this role at this particular time and point interimly. And so, Ms. Brackens, I want to punt it over to you to share with the board for just a minute.
Good morning. I'm so happy to be here with you all this morning. I'm usually here, but my camera is off. Like Cheryl said, we worked together in Lake County for a number of years before I came over to Hillsborough County. I have over 30 years of experience with county government, and I've done housing and community development grants for about 15 years. I also have experience with transit grants and local funding and general using general funds and local funds. So I am excited about this challenge and looking forward to working with Mrs. Howell and all of you. Thank you.
Well, welcome to the team again, some more. I'm very glad to see that you'll be available to the board and to our residents as we continue to increase our opportunities when it comes to affordable housing and how that happens. Thank you very, very much for that. Looking forward to working with you, definitely. Ms. Howell?
And our first item on my agenda is the local housing incentive strategy. And we've been working very, very diligently on several different incentive strategies. Right now, we have a bundle of incentives, and I can tell you that we're light years ahead of most of our counterparts throughout the state of Florida, but we're working on some really big ones now. They are not included in the LHIS as we're speaking. We're still working on those with the MPO, and hopefully we will have those approved before the end of the year. This LHIS typically comes to the AHAB board in October because we have to get it to the Board of County Commissioners and to the Florida Housing Finance Corporation before year's end, and so we back into those dates. And I have Ms. Willette Hollinger here. She's our planning and resource manager, and she'll be presenting the LHIS to you this morning. Ms. Hollinger?
Good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Good morning, Madam Chair, board members. This is Willette Hollinger, Planning and Resource Manager for Affordable Housing. I apologize for my voice ahead of time. In your packets before you, you have a draft of the Local Housing Incentive Strategy, also known as the LHIS, that once adopted will be used to assist in the development of local housing, development of the Local Housing Assistance Plan, which is our LHAP, as you know. That must be submitted to the state by May in order for us to continue to receive our SHIP funding. It probably looks very familiar to you as there has not been any changes to the current plan. Again, this is a draft. It will come back before the AHAB, as Ms. Howell stated, for a public hearing next month on the 11/14 meeting. for public hearing, and then on to the BOCC for consent. We have currently 10 items. And we've got a couple meetings that will be coming up that could impact it. However, if there are any changes made to those meetings that's going to impact this, we'll be bringing it back to you again in a draft, and we'll make those changes prior to that. If you have any questions, I'm available. This is a draft. We just ask that you look at it and prepare for the public hearing next month.
Thank you. Ms. Hollinger, that was excellent. I think just to bring all the board members up to speed, we are addressing our housing element, our density element, our corridor preservation element. You know, there's many comprehensive plan changes in the queue that will impact our some of the calculations associated with this local housing incentives. They haven't been approved yet, okay, but they will be hopefully before the end of the year, and that would impact some of the data that's in here. I mean, that's part of the reason why we would need to update this, is to make the changes accordingly. Are there any questions regarding the incentive strategies that we're being presented? Mr. Rosenwasser.
The only concern I have as a property manager is under item 6, it says reduction of parking. I can't tell you how many, it used to be 2 spaces per apartment, it went down to 1.5, went down to 1 1/4, and unfortunately, most families have at least 2 cars, if not more. And so I think careful attention needs to be paid to that portion of any change, because it not only affects the residents' satisfaction with the apartment community, their ability to park their car in their community and not have to go park at someplace else and walk, particularly at night in certain areas that may not be safe to do so. And it, most importantly, creates a little bit, not a little bit, but a lot of disputes between residents. I've seen some go as far as put their own orange cones out in front of spaces, put their own name on the curb, and so it's something that just needs to be watched carefully.
I appreciate that. We have had long conversations about land use and the appropriate issues. Parking for cars when we have no space for people is a bit of a challenge. Or a prioritization for cars when we don't have spaces for people is a challenge. Part of this, the issue associated with possible reduction of parking also wants to be matched up when transit's available. So there's an alternative to having every person that lives in a household have to own a car to be able to have their lives work. Is a transition away from a car-centric, philosophy. But we do recognize in some circumstances a reduction of parking spaces could create some challenges, and I think finding some balance there is going to be important. But I have found, depending on the density and the urbanization of a community, there are going to be differences in what you experience in the suburban and rural areas as opposed to urban areas where a grid exists and people can move around. But that's where partnership with our home builders and our developers become critically important in terms of how they design a community and how that works. Mr. Powell, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to address Mr. Rosenwasser's comment and just further point out to your comments that this is just, a minimum requirement. This is something that I know, and we've had presentations from affordable housing, developers about, the parking and the costs that are associated when they have to factor, that into their development as a requirement. And this is just reducing the minimum requirement. They still have the ability to develop their community and their development based on 2 parking cars or however many parking, spaces, if they want, but allowing for that reduction allows for more units. So just making sure that you understood that.
Excellent. Ms. Jackson-Sims?
Today that says,
I see the wheels turning constantly, so you.
well, and I think that the housing department also knows to look at the type of development that it is. Elderly housing does not need parking like that. Special needs housing developments does not need parking like that. So it makes absolutely no sense to require it in those circumstances. So I know that they are a strong group of professionals that know to look at the type of development that's going forward in the planning and zoning and permitting side to make those determinations.
Excellent, thank you very much. Any other comments? Okay, so we will, as the comp plan gets adopted and approved, there'll be an opportunity to present these in a more final and get approved by the Board of County Commission. So if you have any other comments or questions, please make sure you send that to Ms. Hollinger or to Ms. Bracken, and we'll make sure that information is considered for any possible considerate of changes. Ms. Howell?
Our next item is our recently approved items that went to the Board of County Commissioners. And so I just want to really highlight one of those. We are very, very busy in affordable housing, but we are closed on a 96-unit apartment complex, and the CDC of Tampa partnered with us on that in terms of our advocacy and our support of preservation of housing. We were able to acquire, and we will be doing a lot of rehabilitation on this 96-unit apartment complex. We actually closed this past Friday, but we had the agenda item approved a couple of weeks earlier. So really, really excited about that. Nowhere near enough, but a 96-unit apartment complex is a pretty large size development. So I did want to point that out to you. We have several items in our agenda packet. Please peruse through and look through at your convenience. And if you have any questions about any of those items, please don't hesitate to reach out to either myself or Ms. Brackens.
Ms. Howell, Mr. Rosenwasser had his hand raised.
Ms. Howell, thank you for bringing that up. My company has managed Armature Place for a number of years, and the ownership, the prior ownership, was not allowing us to keep it up to what we consider acceptable standards. We are working, in fact, I think we're finalizing our management agreement today, so that we can continue to manage a community that we know very, very well. We know the needs of it very well. We know the needs of the residents very well. And I'm quite excited about CDC's acquisition of that, and again, providing better housing and working with the CDC relative to the affordable housing opportunities with those with income below 80% of the AMI.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Rosenwasser. Look forward to working with you. We certainly we have the Affordable Housing Services report that just simply outlines the different divisions in the department and their efforts. We have no new updates on our federal, state, or local grants, but please note that in January we began our annual RFP process, and that's for our federal and our state funding as well. We have our monthly newsletter that's included in our packet, and we will come back with a calendar of events next month on different ribbon cuttings and groundbreaking ceremonies for this coming year. So we really love your participation in those, and so we'll make sure that you're notified of all of the events, and I hope to see you at some of them.
Excellent, thank you very much. You know, in this report, and I think this is to address what Mr. Adewapo was looking for, the last sentence of this, last 2 to 3 sentences of this report includes that the good news is we've got an additional 12 new public service agreements that to be added for fiscal year 2023. Good news. The compliance team is compiling those agreements for an October 1st start date. Additional good news. That the rental and mortgage assistance program has ended. Not so good news. So oftentimes, you know, we kind of we breeze through this, but for the public's sake, we are aware that these are some opportunities, but also some challenges for the residents, and I think bringing that report back in November becomes very important. I also want to share with you, I did attend the Catholic Charities ribbon cutting in September at Mercy Oaks. It was fun, it was fabulous, it was exciting, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place. So that's excellent. And then I recently attended an opportunity in ribbon cutting. It was too rainy outside to actually cut ribbon, so we did more of a balloon flying inside the house for a Habitat home on a women build program. So it was all women built. The whole street is being built by primarily single moms, and in partnership with Habitat Humanity. And it literally, if you weren't crying, you were laughing and smiling so much. It was just a wonderful experience. So when you see these opportunities to attend, it helps us stay motivated because we are doing good work. It's just the mission is huge. So I appreciate that. Ms. Howell, you've gone over the calendar of events. We can address any future business items, and we've pretty much covered that before we got there, so that's a good thing. Our next meeting, it will be November 14th, on Monday at 9 a.m. at this location. Are there any other comments at this point? Hearing none, I'll call the meeting adjourned. Thank you so much for attending. I appreciate it.